Welcome to another SoilWorks Soil Solution program. We're fortunate to have Dr. Thomas Dykstra, incredibly famous entomologist, and
Can I meet this guy?
a lover of Hawaiian shirts. Aloha, Kamehameha.
Oh, and a big aloha to you too, Mr. Rabenberg.
Dr. Dykstra has had some nicknames in the past. Dr. Sugar, the Sugar Daddy, the Squeezer of Leaves. Don't take that the wrong way. But he evaluates sugar out of a plant, and he evaluates the health of the plant. So what we're going to talk about today is different things that you can do to your soil to help increase the BRIX, which you're so famous for. One of the things that people are looking at is compost and or manure.
Okay.
If I can start here, my background,
You're running the show, so I mean, if you want to start, you can start.
My background right out of college was in the animal pharmaceutical biological, and I'll make this real short, but I worked with a lot of livestock units where their closest fields that had the most manure spread on them used to be their best fields that were now their worst fields. And over the course of time, these feedlots, dairies, hog units, poultry barns, they'd say, why is our ground that we spread all this manure absolutely going completely south and producing almost to the point of nothing? And so we started talking. It's like, well, I said, if you got a ruminant animal like a cow, I said, there's 4 different digestive tracts plus the bringing up of the cud and chewing it again. You have monogastric animals like the turkey, the chicken, the pig that have very efficient digestive tracts. And what you end up with, whether you're looking at a turd or a pie or a pellet or scat, whatever you want to call it.
It's a family show. So far, you're in good territory. You keep
I
it up.
appreciate you evaluating
You
that.
keep it up, yeah.
It's what the animal couldn't digest or didn't want to digest. And so during this, I started analyzing manure. In fact, I got the nickname,
Yeah, family show is going right out the window right now, isn't it?
they said I was a shitologist, that I had my degree in mineralogy. Because most animals will secrete 10 pounds of manure per 300 pounds of body weight, blah, 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 and there's 69% moisture. But what we found is what was in the manure. I'm sorry I dragged you into this.
I am so sorry too.
This can go on your resume if you ever need one in the future.
I would be happy to keep it off.
Everything that ended up in the manure on wet chemistry when we analyzed it wasn't on the top 5 list that the plant needed, the microbes needed, or the environment in the growing area needed to grow healthy, high BRIX, high sugar food. And what I mean by that, when we're looking at the top 5 things, what we've seen, doesn't matter what country, doesn't matter what continent, doesn't matter what plant or what food we're dealing with, we look at available calcium and available phosphorus, not just in the soil, but in the plant. And then we look at carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen in the soil. Would you agree with that so far?
I would agree with that so far.
Okay. In manure, virtually void of calcium. Very little phosphorus, virtually no carbon, no oxygen, and no hydrogen. If you take manure, droppings, crap, poop, whatever you want to call it, pile it up and let it sit, what grows?
Heat.
Yes. What kind of green, sun-loving, chlorophylled plant would grow?
A salt-loving one for starters, because you were talking about a significant amount of salt. You just mentioned why. Well, you didn't mention why, but you mentioned the ingredients that are being expelled, and it doesn't include any of the good stuff. That's because it keeps all of the good stuff and puts out all of the bad stuff. So all of the bad crap that comes out at the other end is not going to be conducive usually to a healthy lifestyle for a human being, a cow, or most anything else. And so it has to be processed. It either has to be processed through compost, it can be processed through a dung beetle, but some type of processing needs to occur. Otherwise, it just is a mound of poop which contains usually, traditionally, a lot of salt in it because we don't need to have that much. And so a lot of salt comes out in poop, whether it be human being or cows or otherwise. And so when you have that much, anything that grows in it is usually going to be of a particular variety. And oftentimes, certainly we see these in Florida, and I know that we see them up here too. Anytime you're dealing with a high salt environment, the type of plants that grow from it are rather prickly or pointed.
So with this, and thank you for bringing that up, because most nutritionists are smart enough to put a little more salt in the ration than what the animal actually needs, because in feedlot territory, you can get an animal to eat a little bit. If they get thirsty and they drink, they'll go back to eating. So the salt will usually create a little bit more thirst, and it'll start the process. My point being is, quite a few years ago, one of our organic growers was bringing in some poultry litter, and he was putting out 6 or 7 ton per acre. And he's got the spreaders going back and forth across the field, and I'm looking at this and I'm smelling it, and he's like, what?
This is fresh manure, fresh poultry
This
manure?
is composted manure.
Oh, it's composted already.
Yeah.
Got it.
Compost. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. So I'm looking at it and smelling it, and the grower comes up, he goes, what? And I said, what do you think the odds that there may be some glyphosate in this compost? And of course he does of course you would think that. So let me think about this. This glyphosate has gotten sprayed on the field last year or the year before. It went through the dirt, it went through the plant, it went through the feed mill, it went through the animal, and you're going to say it's still here? I said, I don't know, but I have a bad gut feeling. I said, in fact, and this is before there were many glyphosate labs to test it. We sent it out to San Francisco, I believe, and it was a $500 test at the time. And I said, I'll send it and pay for it, because I think it's going to add insult to injury. The results came back, and in 6 or 7 ton, he was spreading about 32 ounces of glyphosate per acre.
Apparently, the animal wasn't able to break it down successfully. Now, this was glyphosate. It wasn't AMPA?
This is glyphosate.
Glyphosate. Okay.
Yeah. So my point being is, if the feed that's been used has been genetically modified, there may be an opportunity that it will be in there. Corn silage, bean meal. This is just one test. We've seen others. Not saying it's all bad, but here's what the point that I want to make. If you start with crap, guess what you're going to end up with?
Crap?
Possibly a different version, different color.
Different version of it.
But it's crap. It is not what the minerals that are needed to increase the sugar content. Now, with compost, and you had mentioned there's many different things that can be composted, our best results with our growers are when they have used a non-manured compost. Tree waste, yard waste, food waste from grocery stores. And there's a lot of people out there saying, look at the nitrogen level in the compost because that's what you want. We differ from that because the composition of a plant, 47% carbon, 43% oxygen, 4% hydrogen, dry matter basis, and the carbon to nitrogen. If the compost that you're using or looking at doesn't show a carbon to nitrogen ratio, and as far as the microbes go, that carbon to nitrogen, why would that be important for the microbes in the soil that this compost is going to be spread upon?
Well, they're going to need more carbon than they are nitrogen. Nitrogen is going to be needed, but in smaller amounts. They're going to need a massive amount of carbon. So you just mentioned adding plant material and other things like that to add to the compost. And this way you increase the CN ratio that we're discussing right now. So that's going to be higher and therefore more beneficial. So what you're saying too is that another thing probably worth mentioning too is that some manure can be included in compost, just in smaller amounts, because there's a pure composting of, let's say, cow poop, and that's obviously going to be of a different quality. Whereas then there are ways of just doing pure plant matter, and then there's some of throwing a little bit of everything, and you get compost out of that as well. So smaller amounts certainly can be allowed. However, if you're dealing with a lot of livestock and you're putting in your own manure into compost, you're probably going to be a little top heavy as far as that type of compost. It's going to be a high manure compost. And because manure has a very high nitrogen to carbon ratio, so the CN is going to be much lower than when you have more nitrogen, this is going to potentially create some problems for you. But you also mentioned something else, and this was a few minutes ago, and it's worth emphasizing too, is that when Glenn was talking earlier, he was saying that a lot of the manure, the composted manure, was being spread, and it looked like it was having a beneficial effect. And then over time, things started to go bad. This is the way it usually works. When you have a healthy system can absorb a lot of crap. So the analogy that I often use in my talks is I didn't see anything that you just did right now. But if you take a look, for example, at the Mississippi River, there's a lot of garbage that was put into the Mississippi River, and for many, many years, it handled it just fine. Because when you have a healthy ecosystem, it can handle it. Eventually, a system gets overwhelmed, and the Mississippi River obviously has become more polluted over time. And the same thing goes with the system that Glenn just mentioned, and that is it can handle manure. All healthy systems can handle manure, but not too much. And if you overdo it, in the case that is being discussed right now, you can create problems for yourself. And so overdoing it with something that's unhealthy is bad. You can put something that's healthy, and overdoing it is not going to be a severe problem. For example, sugar. This is not something which needs to be as tightly regulated as some of the nitrogenous or nitrogen-forming compounds that are out there, manure being one of them, or even the composted manure that come from it. So it's interesting that you say that. So I just wanted to make it clear to the viewers too, is that a healthy system does work with crap that we throw at it. Too much of it can overwhelm it. But at the same time, this brings up another point too, and that is our agricultural system in general, because we have continually put high salt manures, high salt high salt pesticides, high salt NPK fertilizers, and therefore the system is starting to become very, very corrupt. And so at the beginning of the stage,
The system.
the agricultural system,
The growing
the soil system.
Okay.
They could all handle this. When the pesticides were used in large amounts back in the 1940s, they handled it okay. Now they're much more sensitive, and there's a lot more vomiting up of the crap that is being put on, and plants are not doing as well anymore.
What changed?
What changed is the amount. That's what I was referring to right now, is the amount of stuff that we put on. We were still putting on, some pretty potent, for example, pesticides. We were still doing NPK fertilizers way back in the 40s when it began. But part of the thing that has changed is that we have overwhelmed the system, because this is now not quite 100 years though, but we're now about 80 years into this experiment. So what has changed is the quantity. So the quality is a problem, and that's what Glenn just mentioned. We've got a quality issue. We need to have healthier compost. That in and of itself is important, but then there's also the quantity issue too, because as Glenn has noticed even more than I have, and that is if you put too much of a bad thing on, the system, the soil cannot handle it. And then you put down seeds, the crops come up, they don't do well, because essentially they're being raised in trash.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a lot.
So a little bit of manure is okay.
A little bit of manure is fine, sure, because this is how nature works.
Probably a good time, the chocolate pudding that you had for dessert after lunch, it had just a little bit of cow crap in it.
Missed it.
Just a little bit. Won't hurt you a bit.
Do you have a toothpick?
Nope. That's a piece of cracked corn that went through.
Yeah.
Point being is, whatever you choose to use, watch the cause and effects of that. And
I think this will work.
the whole goal is to what?
The whole goal is to increase BRIX in your plants. That's the whole goal. That is the end game.
Okay, now, there's a lot of people that will naysay this. You've swam upstream for quite some time with this.
Still am.
I have gotten laughed out of buildings because of this. They'll say it's not that accurate. Say they could be right. They would say, oh, if you check it in the morning, you check it in the afternoon, you check it cloudy, you check it after a rain, you check it after a storm. The numbers all over the place.
Heard this all before.
No way.
Yes, I have. But I've never been laughed out of a building. But keep going. You're doing great.
My mom always says, whatever you do, do it your best.
Fantastic.
So if I'm going to get laughed at, I'm going to be by the curb.
Okay.
Some people will say, oh, sometimes you get a real clear-cut line. Other times it's a fading from one to the other. It's like, how can you count on anything that is so variable, Tom? Come on, you're a doctor. You're a PhD, for crying out loud. Help us out.
Help us out. The problems that Glenn is referring to right now are almost always associated with individuals who cannot raise the BRIX. And so when you cannot raise the BRIX, the tendency is to say, this thing doesn't work. I'm at a 3 BRIX right now. I've gone up to maybe a 4, but it still doesn't work. I'm just not able to get any higher. And so you get to that point where you realize, okay, because you can't get up the BRIX, you are disqualifying the whole system. Here is an analytical instrument, which is very precise, using light, the bending of light and a refractometer in order to get a precise measurement. And this precise measurement is not being taken seriously enough because there's nothing wrong with the instrument. There is a problem with the sap that is being put on it. And this sap is usually, on most of the plants on planet Earth, is usually quite high. It's running between 8 to 18, 80% of the time. So I can go out, whether it be outside of my laboratory or just around anywhere, and find plants that are 14, 15, 16 or more.
Crop plants?
No, not the crop plants, just other types of plants.
Wild plants.
Wild plants.
Untouched plants.
But that's the point I'm trying to make right now, is that you can get high BRIX.
Unfertilized
and
plants.
we have it all the time. As a matter of fact, they're not fertilized. Thank you for bringing that up. I never thought about that.
Unchemical sprayed.
There are no chemicals on it either.
Well, why aren't they getting destroyed by insects that are feeding the crops?
I don't know. Maybe someone... Trolls. Trolls are spraying insecticides and therefore killing the insects on these trees. That's why.
So these plants in the wild, unprotected,
unprotected,
unsupervised,
unsupervised,
ungroomed, untilled,
all those
survive.
And they do very well.
And you check those plants and then compared to what we're growing for food.
Yeah, what we're growing for food is considerably lower than between 8 to 18. They're usually between 2 to 10.
So would you say that agriculture in general is going the right direction?
It doesn't seem to, based upon the numbers.
What if we were working for a synthetic company?
Well, I would change my tune and I would suppress the BRIX refractometer as much as possible because I realized that this little instrument, which can be certainly less than $100, is going to cause me some problems. Some problems meaning not enough revenue coming in.
Revenue, synthetic,
that type of thing.
Stock.
Just between you and me.
Okay.
Yeah. So because of that...
Don't tell anybody else.
No, I'm not going to mention that to anybody else. So because of that, this needs to be vilified. But I know, that plants can certainly reach high BRIX, and they could do so rather easily, and they do so routinely. And so if we do not get high BRIX, everyone feels that there's a problem, but they do not think that the problem is themselves or that the problem is associated with their crop. They believe that something else is involved, and therefore this thing very cleanly needs to be placed into a drawer, closed a drawer, maybe even lock the drawer so that nobody is tempted in order to take this out again, because this is a continual reminder of inadequacy
Or success
or success.
as it goes up.
Yes.
Now, going back, so this measures sugar content. So you flip the lid, you put some leaves and some stem in there, you squeeze a couple drops, you close it, you look at the light separates and bends through the prism of glass
Yeah.
and gives you a number.
It does.
Okay. When we're looking at this, what three elements are we primarily focused on, i.e. sugar,
Sugar is the big one. Yeah.
which is comprised of,
Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
okay,
Okay.
which is photosynthesis.
Yeah, that's correct. That is the end product of photosynthesis.
Which now goes back to taking a look at your compost or your mulch or your composted manure. You should have as high of carbon to nitrogen ratio as you possibly can. If they don't give you a carbon to nitrogen ratio, please ask. If they're not proud of that number, they may not want to show it to you. In the soil, the goal is a minimum of a 16-to-1 before the microbial activity begins and life starts to come back.
You will have some serious jump in activity at that point when you go to 16 to 1. Yes. It's still not great, though, 16
It's
to 1.
just the beginning.
It is the beginning, but it's a very good beginning. As a matter of fact, it's so good because it's so considerably better than some of the CN ratios that we have out there right now that it seems like you may have struck payday, when in fact you've just opened them up and they're now just beginning to party. One other thing, too, in regards to the refractometer, and that was the line that appears. This line appears on this, if it's a little fuzzy, is just an indication of calcium. So, in you also making an indirect relationship based upon the bending of light, is that if there's excess calcium in the drop of sap that is placed on there, the line will not be sharp. It will be a little bit fuzzy, and it will be very obviously fuzzy. You just have to choose the middle of that fuzzy line in order to estimate that you were at, let's just say 12, 12.5, 13. It's hard to go much more than 0.5 BRIX on this. You can get more exact with the digital one, but the digital one does not reveal anything about calcium. So if you want to know whether or not you've got a fair amount of calcium in there, then you really are forced to use this particular instrument, which gives you that fuzzy line and will indicate you that there's a fair amount of calcium in there. However, if you use a digital one, there is no fuzzy line, and therefore there's no way to directly measure. Of course, there's an indirect measurement, and that is if you get a 16 BRIX, by default, you're going to have a lot of calcium in there without even measuring it. Whereas this, you can actually get a reading, and so that explains the fuzzy line that some people see. If you don't like fuzzy lines and you have difficulty reading them, then you might want to avoid this. But I think most people are comfortable with dealing with a fuzzy line because you're just looking for an estimate. You don't need to be too terribly exact, whereas the digital refractometer will differentiate between a 12.1 and a 12.2.
Yeah, decimal points. Guess what one the doctor uses? I don't care about or bothered with fuzzy lines.
Loser. Yeah.
Here's what I look at is if you're looking at the surface tension of the soil, don't lose your mind if you're at 120 or 130. This is horseshoes and hand grenades. In other words, you get points for being close. If you're somewhere between 100 and 150, drive on. When you start looking at the EC meter, the electricity of the soil, it's good to know what it is, but none of these numbers are going to change instantly. You can kill something fast. It's tough to bring back life. So when you're looking at the compost, minimum 14, 15, 16 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. Please don't worry about the nitrogen if it isn't there. You're going to have some people say, oh, it's all about nitrogen. Nitrogen is needed by the plant in very small amounts if it has access to carbon and oxygen. The plant makes sugar. You want to get rid of your nitrogen bill? Californians, the Netherlands are getting cut back and getting monitored, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We can't use this nitrogen. We can't grow a crop.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
If you want to cut your nitrogen bill down, take a look to see what your carbon and oxygen is in the soil. Start building that up with good compost. You're a promoter of putting sugar, white household sugar.
White, brown sugar, molasses. I mean, all three of them work very well for putting sugar into the soil.
They feed the microbes.
They do.
Microbes start to party.
They do.
The process starts.
Yeah.
But the end result is
the BRIX refractometer. And so he brings up another point too, is that you're putting the sugar down there. It just so happens that of all the microbes in the soil, the reputation is highest among the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They require more sugar than other microbes, meaning if you want nitrogen, you need to be putting down an excess amount of sugar in order to make sure that they are happy so that they can fix the nitrogen. A lot of free nitrogen in the atmosphere right now, easy to pick off if you're a nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and you're not. But if you are, and you have the ability to do that, you are going to need a sugar source. Otherwise, you don't have the fuel to get it done. And that's why, in part, we put down sugars. And you will find when you put down a fair amount of sugar, your nitrogen bill will go down.
Mm-hmm. We're not against the fertilizer companies. We're definitely not against the chemical companies. Who are we for?
We're for the farmer.
The grower, the producer.
Yeah.
Looking to produce food. We're SoilWorks. We're glad we had Dr. Tom Dykstra here. You have some more information on this refractometer and other things. If they're curious, I don't know why they would be, but if they're curious to see and hear more.
Assuming that the viewer is curious right now, assuming that you would like to know just a little bit more about a regular good old-fashioned refractometer and a digital one. Assuming you want to do that and you want to know a little bit about what it all means and you have a little bit of extra time on your hands, go to YouTube, search for Thomas Dykstra. You'll run across a couple videos. Hopefully that will be helpful for you.
For Dr. Dykstra and myself at SoilWorks, we hope this has been beneficial and we appreciate you watching. Thank you.